Welcome back to Whence, a Freemasonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. I'm your host, Robert Johnson, a York Rite Mason and Knight Templar. Not much news this week. Installation of officers is next week for my home lodge, and I'm looking forward to that. I will be the senior deacon this year, and one of my duties will be the children's Christmas party. And I should say that for the week of Thanksgiving and for the week of Christmas, unless I get to recording in advance, there may not be episodes for those 2 weeks. We hit well over 4,000 downloads this week, and the Whence store is almost up, so stay tuned and look for that on the website. So last week we talked about the history of the Shriners. We will continue that a bit here in the following piece, which deals with a few things that you may recognize, namely the fez, the emblem, and finally the purpose. All this is according to the shrinersinternational.org website. So the first piece is the fez. The fez is one of the most recognizable symbols of Shriners International and was adopted as the Shriners' official headgear in 1872. Named after the city of Fez, Morocco, the hat represented the Arabian theme in the fraternity, and it was founded on it. It also serves as an outward symbol of one's membership in the fraternity. Much like the white apron worn by Masons as a symbol of their brotherhood, the fez is worn only by Shriners as a symbol of their membership in this unique fraternity. Today, the fez is worn at Shriners functions, in parades, and at outings as a way of gaining exposure for the fraternity. Members customize their fez to show their allegiance to their temple. Look closely at a fez, and you will also learn other important information about its wearer, such as membership in shrine clubs, special roles within the organization, and much more. Each fez is custom made, and a Shriner may own more than one fez, depending on his activities and memberships. Next, let's talk the emblem. The emblem on the front of a fez is a crescent and a scimitar. It is an important part of the fraternity's theme and is representative to the characteristics embodied by the Shriners. The scimitar stands for the backbone of the fraternity, its members. The two claws are for the Shriners fraternity and its philanthropy. The Sphinx stands for the governing body of the Shriners, and the five-pointed star represents the thousands of children helped by the philanthropy each year. The emblem also bears the phrase Rober et Furor, which means strength and fury. And lastly, let's talk about the purpose. During the early part of the 20th century, membership in the Shriners International grew at a steady pace. By 1946, membership had jumped 150,000 nobles, and another 250,000 had joined in 1958. In fact, Shriners International experienced one of its largest periods of growth in the years following World War II, as returning soldiers looked for new ways to continue the camaraderie they had experienced with their fellow soldiers. As the number of temples and nobles grew, so too did the hospitals. By 1958, the hospital's endowment was valued at $125 million and growing. The nobles were proving themselves to be excellent fundraisers. The Shrine Circus, founded in 1906 for fun and entertainment, began to play a role as a significant fundraiser in support of the hospitals. Today, there are nearly 200 temples across North America, South America, Europe, and Southeast Asia. In addition to the Shrine Circus, temples hold events throughout the year ranging from fish fries to concerts, car shows to fishing tournaments. It is fun with a purpose, supporting the important mission of Shriners Hospitals for Children. There you have it, some great information on the Shriners. Now, for those of you who are not yet Freemasons, the Shrine is not something that it takes forever to get to. Once you are a Master Mason and in good standing, you may join the Shrine. But remember, as my mentor Curtis Carman always told me, if you sign up for every appendant body of Freemasonry, you will have something to do every night, but no one to talk to at home. What he meant was, be careful not to let lodge obligations take control. Remember, it's family first. If you can't become a lodge officer or go to the meetings because your wife would like to spend time with you, then you should spend time with your wife. The brethren will understand. Speaking of Curtis Carman, my mentor, you know, some people have asked why I named the show Whence Came You? And besides the obvious thing, I remember once that Curtis told me his favorite bumper sticker he had ever seen was a sticker that read just that, Whence Came You? It's appropriate because everyone who is a Mason knows what that means, even the entered apprentice. And so, I named the show as a tribute to my dear friend, brother, and mentor, and I should add a note, not just to me, to most of the Masons at my home lodge. He passed about 2 years ago. This week's famous Freemason is a hilarious comedian and actor. His most recent movie is called Tower Heist. Can you guess who it is? That's right, Eddie Murphy from Hollywood Lodge 542. Almost nothing can be found on today's Freemasons in the media. Perhaps it is personal again, or perhaps they must think of the well-being of the fraternity. Either way, it is well known that he is a member and in good standing. Edward Reagan Eddie Murphy, born April 3, 1961, is an American stand-up comedian, actor, writer, singer, director, and musician. Box office takes from Murphy's films make him the second highest grossing actor in the United States. He was a regular cast member on Saturday Night Live from 1980 to 1984, and has worked as a stand-up comedian. He was ranked number 10 on Comedy Central's list of 100 greatest stand-ups of all time. He has received Golden Globes Award, nominations for his performances in 48 Hours, Beverly Hills Cop series, Trading Places, The Nutty Professor, and in 2007 he won the Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor and received a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of a soul singer James Thunder Early in Dreamgirls. Murphy's work as a voice actor includes Thurgood Stubbs in the PJs, Donkey in the Shrek series, and the dragon Mushu in Disney's Mulan. In some of his films he plays multiple roles in addition to his main character instead, as a tribute to one of his idols, Peter Sellers, who played multiple roles in Doctor Strangelove and elsewhere. Murphy has played multiple roles in Coming to America, Wes Craven's Vampires in Brooklyn, and the Nutty Professor films, where he played the title role in 2 incarnations, plus his father, brother, mother, and grandmother. Bowfinger and 2007's Norbit. Murphy will host the 84th Academy Awards in 2012. Should also be noted that Peter Sellers, one of his idols, was also a Freemason. Moving along, this week's paper is entitled The Dark Days of Masonry by Heather Borner, which was plucked from the California Freemason in December of 2010, January 2011 issue. The 19th century brought a shift in politics, a suspicious citizenry, and a man named Morgan. A changing industrial world, feelings of economic and political powerlessness, new forms of media that allow citizens to scrutinize their government like never before. Sound familiar? No, it's not modern ages, banking problems, or internet explosion. It's the early 19th century, when one man's disappearance triggered a political movement that sidelined and warped the public views of Masonry. Simply put, the Morgan Affair of 1826 changed everything. 300 years in 3 weeks. It was late July in Oakland, in a room full of Masons and others, that Matthew Crow developed into these dark days of Masonry. Crow, a PhD candidate in history at the University of California, Los Angeles, was presenting the second of 3 classes in a summer history series offered to the public at 5 cities throughout California. The series, created through the partnership between the Grand Lodge of California and UCLA, was an abbreviated version of Crow's UCLA class, usually reserved for the university's undergraduate students. The course, Freemasonry and the American Democracy in Historical Perspective, traced the role of Freemasonry from the 17th century America to the present, that included the Morgan Affair. It's important to remember that 1826 was the 19th century what 1968 is for us today, said Crow. Everyone remembered that date and what it meant. An entire political party sparked up quickly and suddenly. That movement had very serious consequences, not just for Masonry, but for the reorienting of American politics. An incidental affair that rallied a nation. In the 15 years that the anti-Masonic movement thrived, its sponsored political candidates swept in a new political thought and moved Masonry from the center of the fringes, where, to some extent, it still is today, said Crow. How that happened and why Masonry was the catalyst is more complicated than just hatred of the Brotherhood. However, a number of forces converged, many of them unrelated to Masonry. The Morgan Affair is almost incidental, he said. Something else could have happened. There was angst out there, and it was going to assert itself. Anti-Masonry is where it did. For the brothers in class, this wasn't easy to swallow. After all, how could such broad factors, a political power vacuum, the rapid industrialization of the country, the retrenchment of traditional religion, lead to a movement that specifically targeted Masons. Masonry was targeted based on a growing suspicion of exclusive associations, said Crow. In the early 19th century, the country was grappling with how much power associations should wield. Should they dole out their own justice? Crow used this example. What if one of the Masons in the class beat the other to within an inch of his life on the steps of the lodge building? Would the brotherhood punish the offending brother and offer recourse to the injured party? Or would the brotherhood leave justice to the police? In Anderson's Constitution, Anderson assumes brothers would conduct themselves without wrath or rancor in public. In other words, what happens in lodge stays in lodge, no matter how extreme. Today the law wins out, leaving the brotherhood to sanction the offending party separately. Anything else would be considered vigilantism in the eyes of the law. But at the time, there was a kind of associational justice that pervaded the land. It was in this context that William Morgan, a would-be brother in Batavia, New York, no record exists of him receiving Masonic degrees, although he did gain entrance to several lodge meetings, grew disillusioned with the Masons and threatened to publish a book revealing their inner workings. The question became, how would the brotherhood punish him, or would they? Enter the Whigs. Lodge leaders said no, arguing that Morgan could no more harm Masonry than harm the sun by throwing mud in the air. Then, the printing press intended to publish Morgan's book burned down. Shortly after, Morgan disappeared forever, leaving behind a broad public assumption that the Masons, incensed by his slander, killed him. And suddenly, the loss of individual freedom brought about by the sudden Industrial Revolution, the dying away of the country's founders, the retrenchment of traditional religion, and the nascent abolitionist and suffrage movements coalesced against a single target. It wasn't just spontaneous, though. The Whigs, led by men such as Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams, stoked the anti-Masonic movement for their own political gain. After all, the Whigs' political ideas gained little traction in the age of Jacksonian democracy. Conveniently, Jackson was a Mason, and could be lumped in with the renegade brothers at one lodge. The Morgan affair created a tension between the way Freemasonry saw itself and the way people on the outside saw it, explained Crow, and that tension survives today. So that's it for this week. A quick note that this week's paper will not be in the PDF, same as before, since it is already available through the free app called California Freemason. Also, I did want to say thanks again to Brother Creason. I received the new edition of his book, Famous American Freemasons, Volume 1 and 2, and it's really great. A must-read if you're a Freemason. Links to both books are on the website, as well as links to the show apps and much more at wcypodcast.blogspot.com. Follow us on Twitter at Whence, and add us to your circle on Google Plus at the email address wcypodcast@gmail.com. Remember, you can send any questions to that email address as well. You can also listen to the show on Facebook via Flash Player once you've clicked like the show. Anyway, take care and don't eat too much of your kids' candy this Halloween season. And for Whence, I'm Robert Johnson.